Arlington, like many communities across our country, is struggling with how to manage the changes the town and the world face as a result of climate change and population growth. We want to cherish the amenities we know and love, but we anticipate changes ahead. Thinking about change and contemplating the future built environment is hard. In 2020, I proposed to the Select Board a design competition for Arlington. My background includes training as a city planner and a deep appreciation for Isaac Asimov's science fiction. I believe that thinking ahead into an indeterminate future can help us better understand how to manage our decisions today to shape that future. Arlington has this advanced planning for action baked into its culture already, with the evolution of the Vision 2020 program started with Jane Howard in 1991 and continued as today's Envision Arlington. The civic engagement group of Envision Arlington took up the challenge. The intent is to bring in some fresh perspectives from designers, artists, planners, and visionaries. We asked them to leapfrog 20 years into the future and create a post-pandemic vision for our town. Our hope is that these new visions from the teams presenting today will help our community find new ways to think about how to build for our future. We focused on the Broadway corridor area. This area was identified in 2019 for an in-depth study by the MIT Department of Urban Studies and Planning students. The study, commissioned by Arlington's Department of Planning and Community Development, provided a depth of data, mapping, and resident insights. The site includes an important transit corridor, a park, and a school. It seemed like a good baseline for sampling new visions for the future. Today, we will see these new visions for the very first time. We are extraordinarily lucky to have 3 excellent teams. Each team has a unique tie to Arlington. The Arlington High School team may be thinking about what Arlington should look like from the perspective of teenagers who live in Arlington now and may raise their families in Arlington 20 years from now. The MIT team comes from the same world-renowned urban studies and planning program that brought us the students who prepared the original Broadway corridor study. These students bring insights from all over the world to shape their visions for today. The Winslow Architects team combines the understanding of participants who work in the Arlington community with the rigorous training of how architects problem solve to create new built environments. We can't have a competition without our judges. Not only are judges bringing the skills required, but are also actively involved in the Arlington community and live here. Adria Arch, good morning, Adria, has lived in Arlington since 1985. She is a visual artist whose work is included in many private and public collections, including the De Cordova Sculpture Park and Museum. Arch was a founding member of Arlington Public Art and past co-chair of the Arlington Commission for Arts and Culture. She's helping start our town's vibrant public art programming. Caroline Murray is a construction professional with Turner Construction, an international general contractor. She brings 22 years of building experience in Boston, Cambridge, and New York City. Currently, she is senior project manager and also the sustainability manager for her business unit, focusing on knowledge sharing, embodied carbon, energy, circulation, supply chain transparency, and resiliency. Caroline resides in Arlington Heights, is a town meeting member, and serves on the Envision Arlington Standing Committee. Rachel Zembury is an architect and president of Bergmeyer, a design collaborative with offices in Boston and Los Angeles, specializing in the creation of branded user experience and placemaking. An Arlington resident, Rachel is the chair of the Arlington Redevelopment Board and serves on multiple committees in town, focused on economic development and revitalization of our business districts. This event would not have happened without the encouragement of DHCD, especially outgoing director Jenny Raitt, the approval of the Arlington Select Board, and the energy and fundraising of the Civic Engagement Group of Envision Arlington, and the support and assistance of the Select Board Chair and Civic Engagement Group Co-Chair Len Diggins. And special thanks to the extraordinary, and I do mean extraordinary, team at ACMI who will bring this event to posterity. Let's look at the visions now and contemplate how we can extrapolate these visions into community-wide conversations about Arlington's future built environment.
All right, so hi, I'm Petru Sofio. I'm an Arlington High School sophomore, and I'm very interested in transportation design and how we can move towards people-first transportation.
Yeah. My name is Talia Askenazi. I'm a 9th grader at Arlington High School, and I'm very interested in seeing how we can promote sustainability and diversity in towns and cities in the future. So before we delve into our presentation, we'd like to give a quick thanks to Mr. Vatan, who's our CAD teacher, which is where we got exposed to this competition. Computer-aided design and development is a very interesting class, which helps students get exposed to STEM topics and really get immersed in conversations like this. So when we were going to design this competition, we learned one thing that centered our entire conversation. We learned that 72% of all people growing up in a community end up living in that community or nearby. So what this means is that the future of Arlington is in the hands of the students growing up here today. So we really wanted to gather the information about what students want to see in their future. To do this, we reached out to them through 2 surveys. The first asked more vague questions, like what do you want to have in Arlington? And what do you see main roads in Arlington looking like in the future? To which we got a variety of very thorough responses, all of which can be summed up in our word art that you see in the corner. As you can see, students really stress the importance of parks in their community.
We also looked at what students wanted for main roads, as roads take up so much of our space in our community, and we noticed that people were really oriented to people-first transportation, such as bicycling.
So we also conducted an alternative method of gathering student input, and this was an interactive survey poster. It gave students a list of choices, and they chose the one that was the most important to them. Here we have the data we collected from that.
And we also took a look at the current corridor by taking walks on Broadway and taking photos. And we noticed a lot of people biking on Broadway, but there are no bicycle facilities or shared lanes. And we also noticed a lot of people walking on Broadway, but when walking on Broadway, the street is so wide, cars were traveling fast, and vehicles were running red lights, making it an unpleasant experience. So with that data that we collected and from our students and from our observations, we developed some goals for the new Broadway corridor. So when we imagine transportation in the future from our survey, we realized that we have to start designing away from cars, and we have to think more about people-oriented transportation that can be sustainable. So that means walking, biking, or taking the bus. We also want to make sure that that we have walkability in the Broadway corridor by making walking safe, efficient, and desirable.
Right. So in the midst of our climate change crisis, students were concerned about how sustainable Broadway is going to be in the future. So we developed a couple of goals, these being that Broadway needs to have net zero emissions in the future, and there must be environmentally friendly policies put in place. We also heard from students that they have concerns about the diversity in Arlington. So to combat this, we're striving for a diverse residential community and representative downtown commerce in Arlington.
We also want to make sure that our housing is appropriate to the future of Arlington. So that means we want more affordable housing and more mixed use so we can adapt to the growth in Arlington that is expected. We also want to make sure our business community is welcome in Arlington by keeping our beloved businesses, but also adding on to more businesses that residents want.
And by far, the most stressed student interest were public spaces. Students really wanted to see more public spaces where they could congregate safely, and they wanted to see the public spaces that we love and cherish connected in a new system that connects these old spaces in these cherished parks to the new spaces we will create.
And because of that, when we looked at our vision, we didn't just look at the Broadway corridor, even the neighborhood surrounding Broadway, but we really looked at the large area around Broadway and taking a look at the bicycle network, the transportation network, and also what was in a 5-minute walking radius around the corridor to develop our vision. So with that, we made a concept of part of the corridor that encompasses some of the designs that we are having that we want in our future design, that includes separated bike lanes and bus-only lanes, as well as better sidewalks and more creative public spaces. So with that, we're going to go to some of the key features. So one thing that I just talked about was continuous separated bike lanes. So we realized that if we want Arlington to be sustainable, we have to encourage the use of bicycles, and the best way to do that is by installing separated bike lanes. We've seen it time and time again that when separated bike lanes are installed, the business community is better and it's safer to walk in that community as well. And we also know that from a case study that when separated bike lanes and wider sidewalks are installed in San Francisco, 66% of merchants noticed an increase in sales directly related to that. We also want to make sure our crosswalks are safer for people walking, and that means by adding in raised crosswalks with curb extensions. So curb extensions are elements in the roadway that can reduce the crossing distance by 14 feet per crosswalk, bringing the crossing distance from 24 feet to 10 feet per crosswalk. And with that, we can put rain gardens on those curb extensions to help with stormwater management, which also helps sustainability. And we can also make those crosswalks raised over the road, so drivers entering and exiting the neighborhoods can slow down, so we can make the side streets more safe. We also want to focus on arterial rapid transit, because we heard from our students that when they took the buses were unreliable and there was no safe place to wait. So what we are proposing is, because what we heard is that students want like a subway on Broadway, except on wheels on a bus, and we realized that we could achieve this with arterial rapid transit. And this is so crucial because when somebody drives a car and they pay $1, society pays $9.48 for that trip. But when somebody takes the bus and they pay $1, society only pays 8 cents for the same trip. So even if we have to deprioritize cars to prioritize transit, that is the best and the most sustainable choice. We also wanted to bring our streets back to people. We realize that our neighborhood streets right now are wide, they're filled with cars, and it's dangerous. When I was a kid, I used to be able to play in the street, and that was some of my fondest memories were from doing that, and now it's not safe for kids to do that. So we want to propose bringing traffic calming to our neighborhood streets that will limit cut-through traffic, and also allowing citizens to think about what they want in front of their house, not just a parking spot. So we can use civic engagement to allow people who live in the house to choose if they want a garden or a park, or if they want a parking spot, but it's their choice for what they want in front of their house, not the city's.
So we also decided to create a list of some strategies we could implement that would affect these more broad components, such as walkability and sustainability. So when we focused on walkability, after researching, we found that having strategies like traffic calming and street art implemented make the Broadway corridor more safe, desirable, and efficient to walk in. It's important to note that when you promote walkability and you make a town desirable to walk in, people start using their cars less, and they turn more towards walking or biking, more sustainable methods of transportation. So we then turned our attention to sustainability. How can we improve sustainability in Arlington? Well, we found a variety of answers to that. By having our sidewalk concretes made instead of the traditional material, but from pervious sidewalk concrete, what we have is these concretes that can absorb water, and they create clean runoff. Also, as Petru mentioned earlier, using the bump outs in our design as rain gardens, that promotes sustainability as well. And, sure. So we also focused on a specific branch of sustainability, which is stormwater resiliency. And stormwater resiliency in a community is so important, because when it's done well, streams, rivers, lakes, all bodies of water are cleaner, flood risks are reduced, and the community and quality of life in a town or city improves altogether. So some of the tactics that we decided to implement, we implemented because of some research that we did having to do with San Francisco. This has been a city that we've looked up to quite a bit while doing our research, particularly in the case of stormwater resiliency, because what we saw was that after they implemented many of these strategies, they saw a decline in destruction, rainwater destruction after flooding or after storms. So some of these strategies are rain gardens, bioretention gardens, which are similar but have some distinct differences, stormwater swales, permeable pavements, as we mentioned earlier, and rain barrels and cisterns. So another big student concern, as we mentioned earlier, was diversity. And we learned that the #1 way to promote diversity is to create cheaper housing. So how do we do that? Well, by using mixed-use buildings, these are buildings that combine commercial uses, housing uses, and recreational uses, we drive the price of housing down. We can also turn to some Arlington legislation, such as parking minimums. Parking minimums can make the price of housing much more expensive by up to 20 to 30%. So by reducing this and making our streets more sustainably transit method focused, we don't even need these anymore, and we can decrease rent by up to 20 to 30%. Another legislation that we should look at are single-family homes. By converting single-family homes into multifamily homes, the price of houses in Arlington dramatically decreases.
We also want to look to our business community to help improve that existing community. And in the pandemic in 2020, we noticed that a lot of businesses got parklets outside to help improve their businesses and make it more desirable from the public. So what we did is that we decided that in our final design, we can make those parklets permanent by making them as curb extensions onto the sidewalk that will allow businesses to have outdoor seating, which will allow businesses to have seating or books or anything they want to have in front of their parking space. And we also wanted to make sure that public space is prioritized with that.
Right. So one more thing we wanted to mention about public spaces was that we're really excited about this idea we have, they're STEM spaces. And so these are spaces, perhaps in the bump outs or all around Broadway, that encourage younger children to get immersed in STEM topics. So by having these spaces where they can learn about STEM topics, they will be inspired and perhaps even join classes like the ones where we learned about this design in CAD class, and this will perpetuate the cycle of improving Broadway. While all of our strategies, we didn't go over all of them, our presentation is accessible online, so you should be able to go through all of them.
Thank you very much for your time. We're happy to take any questions that you may have.
Judges, do you have any questions for the participants?
I guess I would ask on your surveys about how many people responded to each of those surveys.
So we got, for the first survey, which was by far the more popular one, we got a lot more responses. We got around 60, would you say? I think the exact number is 55.
Yeah, 55 or so. And then for the other survey that we did, that which had the interactive poster boards, that one we saw about around 60 as well. I think 62 and then 63 because few people were confused about the method.
We really got, we got the student input a lot from CAD students. We did try to reach out to students from all over the school building, but we really only got to CAD students at the end of the day.
Any other questions?
I just have a question for you. I really enjoyed a lot of the transportation strategies that you started to look up or started to speak about, and so many of them were alternates to car transportation. Did you look at any strategies perhaps to eliminate cars entirely on Broadway or to limit them? Just interested in other strategies you may have perhaps looked into that might have supported some of the other things that you're looking at.
Sure. So we explored doing some transit ways on Broadway, and the transit way would be where you have a block without any cars, but it's just for buses and people biking and walking, of course. And ultimately that didn't make it into the concept design, but that was only a limited scope, and we would propose doing something like that, at least on one of the blocks of Broadway, and that would allow more car traffic to focus on Massachusetts Avenue while buses and people can focus on Broadway. we think that would bring a good balance to the street.
We've got 1 minute. Another question.
Yeah. I was just wondering, my heart is in public art a lot, and I wondered what you think about the use of public art to influence how people respond to their urban landscape.
Sure. So I'm happy to take a little bit of that. So we've seen in studies countless times that when public art is added onto streets, people drive slower. So that's why we would like to have intersections be center places for people to design the streets or design the crosswalks, where we can have a design that's pretty and beautiful and makes the town look more connected, but also slows down traffic. And for example, we looked at doing that on some raised intersections, and that's where the whole intersection goes up to sidewalk level, which slows down all the cars and also creates a better place for people walking, because people in wheelchairs and walking don't have to go down a curb ramp. They can just stay at their level, which makes things safer for everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
That was terrific. And this is Petru Sofio and Talia Askenazi from Arlington High School. If you guys will take a seat, please, and we'll bring up the MIT students. Sharon Hasenfratz is not able to be here today, unfortunately. I've met with her and we're, I thought she was terrific. We are going to have presenting today for MIT, Jay Maddox and Daniel Pratana.
Okay, good afternoon, judges and friends and colleagues in Arlington. The three of us, Jay Maddox, myself, Daniel Pratama, and our lovely friend Shannon, that unfortunately cannot be here today, we will present our vision of East Arlington Complete Neighborhood. So Arlington is blessed with features that most American towns could only dream of. Gorgeous green spaces, bike trails, proximity to a major city, and an excellent school districts all contribute to Arlington's highest desirability. Nevertheless, East Arlington specifically struggles with same issues as many US cities face. Housing costs are increasing for many residents and commuting costs remains high. We notice also underutilization of land and unsafe intersections in Broadway corridor, making streetscape inactive and unsafe for pedestrians. Furthermore, we notice the pollution in Alewife Brook and lack of public transit reliability. However, East Arlington is full of opportunities as well. With careful planning and interventions, Arlington can be envisioned as a complete neighborhood that connects historical civic spaces, amenities, open spaces, using a reliable bus networks and enjoyable walking and biking infrastructure. East Arlington is a space where local businesses flourish and future affordable housing developments can help people to stay in East Arlington. Speaking about affordability, we need to think about affordability comprehensively. We live not only in our housing unit, but within a neighborhood. Any expenses in the neighborhood affect affordability. Therefore, we propose, aside from diversifying housing supply for various kinds of households, we notice that we need more studios, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and more. We need to also lower commuting costs and increase the quantity and quality of public amenities. So we envision Broadway corridor as a central spine that animates connected East Arlington. We visualize 3 nodes: Broadway Plaza, Warren Fork, and East Arlington Gateway. Each node has a unique character and mix of programs that adds richness and vibrancy to the Broadway corridor. Most importantly, these 3 nodes transform this stretch into a complete neighborhood where residents and visitors can satisfy every need within 15-minute walk. Complete here means affordable, accessible, and connected. First, we want to take a look. We want to expand our vision to extend and renew the Broadway Plaza. This means closing Broadway to motor vehicle between Massachusetts Ave and the Franklin Street. This intervention resembles Netherlands Woonerf and activates the neighborhood's historical character and cultural character while introducing new space for retail development. where people can enjoy their weekend and have outdoor dining. We also want to connect arrays of historical and cultural buildings in this corridor with a coherent landscape architecture design and add more character and identity to strengthen the neighborhood's character. Additionally, we noticed that cyclists on the popular Minuteman bike trail here must brave car traffic across Mystic Street and Massachusetts Ave. So what we propose is the Minuteman Connector, an elevated bicycle bridge across this intersection. This bicycle bridge provides a safer intersection for cyclists while simultaneously providing a unique vantage point to see this historical and cultural space that we call Broadway Plaza. Here in Broadway Plaza, we also noticed that there's a 1.5 acres of underutilized public asset that can be repurposed as an affordable housing development. The site is owned by the town of Arlington and therefore can be easily rezoned. This site is strategically located across the Arlington Housing Authority office, making it a prime location to establish the new signature affordable housing as one of the new neighborhood's landmark.
Thank you so much, Daniel. Let's move to our second node, which is Warren Fork. That's our little nickname for the intersection of Broadway and Warren Street. We envision Warren Fork as a local hub. Oh, I'm so sorry. Maybe this makes a bit more sense. Very good. So this is Warren Fork. We envision, and it's basically right here at the center between Warren Street and Broadway, or at that intersection. We envision Warren Fork as a local hub for our complete neighborhood. Current conditions are quite dangerous for both bicyclists and pedestrians. We, through our intervention, we want to actually open up another green space by basically realigning and simplifying the existing intersection right here. Luciano Field will continue to serve as a critical open space, but will be complicated by our new pedestrian-friendly green space. Adjacent to this new green space will be a 3 to 4 story civic building right here, perhaps another branch of the local public library. This new civic hub can serve as a sort of midway point between Thompson Elementary School and the Gibbs School. And with this, we sort of imagine a new gathering space for families, for students, for members of the community. Lastly, additional street crossings will slow down across this sort of stretch of Broadway here, will slow down vehicular traffic and foster a more pedestrian-friendly streetscape. Along with this development, we envision the further development of more medium-density housing, about 3 to 5 stories along this stretch of Broadway here. Next, finally, let's travel a little bit. Let's travel down further down Broadway to our final node, East Arlington Gateway. Here, we want to re-envision underutilized land to meet Broadway's commercial needs. Currently, this stretch of land right here is zoned as major business and vehicular-oriented business. We want to rezone to allow for a vibrant mixed-use community. Our plan for this node could be summarized with 3 words: expand, revitalize, and diversify. Expand Arlington's tax base with a diverse mix of large and medium-sized commercial tenants. Revitalize Alewife Brook as a local a local sort of mini destination for outdoor recreation, and require future developers to contribute to Alewife Brook's environmental remediation as a condition of any development rights that are given. That way, we can sort of expand and improve Alewife Greenway bike path in addition. Lastly, we want to diversify housing stock by adding high-density residential on-site. Ultimately, the advantage of our plan is its simplicity. However, simplicity and modesty, in a way, can still be transformative. From an urban design perspective, this plan doesn't require the community to remake the wheel, so to speak. It takes full advantage of Arlington's geographical strength and wonderful community, Through the creation of 3 distinct nodes, we fulfill the diverse needs of our East Arlington. We will redesign Broadway to be a complete pedestrian and bike-friendly street through the introduction of a separate bike lane and separate intersections for those bikes. We'll also introduce a Minuteman to Mystic slow street, right here, which will help residents cross from Central to East Arlington by foot and by bike. This new Civic Center at Warren Fork will bring together families and local residents in the neighborhood. Along with our complete street, we want to improve the 67 bus service to further connect the community onward to Davis Square. Our vision is achievable by 2042. It's feasible. And lastly, there's a sort of modularity to our plan. While it functions best as a complete package, as a complete neighborhood, each individual node provides immense benefits if implemented alone as well. We recognize, though, that the people of East Arlington are what makes it great and will make it greater in the future. To that end, we've designed an inclusive community engagement program to make sure their voice is instantiated throughout the process. First, we will create engage and interactive programming study to determine which exact programs and what mix of those programs are best for East Arlington residents. We'll make sure any accessibility, any participation is accessible, as well as a transparent implementation process. For example, where somebody could sort of view the progress on the Arlington City website. As a complete neighborhood designed for the community, the future of East Arlington is quite bright. Thank you very much. This is us.
Thank you very much. Judges, do you have any questions? These are clarifying questions on their presentation.
I guess I have a public art question again. How would you might envision public art being utilized to bring those 3 nodes together?
Yeah. In our proposal, especially, Broadway Plaza is re-envisioned as the cultural hub, the historical hub. So we can imagine by closing the streets, we can have like temporary art installation in the street that might represent the local culture and the local history. And I believe that a lot with the new development in housing and new retail development, we can always incorporate public arts into the spaces as well. Do you have anything?
And I would say the same applies for the new Civic Center at Warren Fork.
Yep.
It provides yet another opportunity, yet more space in which to provide for public art.
Thank you.
You started touching on my question just now. Could you talk another minute about the Civic Center and kind of how you envision the use of that building?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just going to go back in the slides if that helps. Sorry, it's a little bit stuck. Yeah, here we go. So I think that's a great question. And I think it's always important to watch out for sort of different competing or redundant resources. I believe there is a public library on Massachusetts Avenue, but it's very cozy, but it's quite small. So we imagine, I think, a far larger kind of library that also is combined with sort of community programming space, public programming space, whether classrooms, auditorium, so on and so forth. I believe the Cambridge Public Library comes to mind on Cambridge Street as a nice sort of, very sort of visually
anchor,
stunning,
yeah.
but also utilizable space. So yeah.
And my question builds off a little bit from the question about the Civic Hub there in terms of how that either does or doesn't interact with the Minuteman to Mystic slow street concept. That was really interesting, and I'm hoping you can talk a little bit more about that concept and how it plays in with some of the nodes that you're creating.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you want to pick up?
Sure. So this is where we envision the new Civic Hub. And this connection to Minuteman to Mystic River is envisioned. So what we notice is that the Civic Hub can connect local schools as one of the nodes that we can connect, right? So we can imagine the slow street become we can imagine like during the morning in the commuting time, we can provide a bike bus program where a lot of high school or school students can ride bike together and then might take a stop perhaps during their recess in the Civic hub. So that might also activate the space. But as we also notice here, they are centrally located to the neighborhood as well. And I believe with the participatory process, we can always redefine what is civic space means, right? So we can always, I believe that the best use of civic space should be flexible enough for future uses, whether we want to celebrate our history or whether we want to add new innovation space or public art space or just simply a gathering and a place to enjoy the weekend.
And to add to that, you know, I can imagine, say you're a family for a baseball game who comes to Luciano Field, as riveting as that may be, you can imagine that you might want a place where you can go and take a break, sit down. Maybe there's a little cafe or read a book. So I think that provides, at least in that instance, especially if you're doing that whole sort of trail, as a nice sort of resting spot, no matter what your uses are. So.
That was great. Jay, Daniel, thank you very much. Why don't you have a seat and we'll bring up the Winslow team.
Hi, John Winslow Architects, Phil Reville, and Delapo Beckley from our firm. We're a local architectural firm. We've specialized in affordable housing development, hate to say it, for almost 40 years myself. And we were pleasantly surprised to see this invite to get to be able to dream a little bit. And I have to confess, we spend so much time kind of making things work that we don't often have the opportunity to step back and dream. So in some ways, it's almost harder for us. So it's been fun to do. And we have a presentation to make. I would say I'm going to give the big picture overview, and then Phil is going to lead us to the presentation. We found it an interesting concept to reconcile the idea of corridor with neighborhood. And that we viewed that as the challenge. And we really want to acknowledge and appreciate the presentations that have been made, excuse my voice, all of which pick up on that. It can be a tension. Corridor implies moving through, and neighborhood implies place. So we have a presentation that talks about that. And I have to say that even with our own firm, we've had a fun time. We might have some disagreements on some of the things we're presenting. And I lastly want to say, in case any viewers are watching this, we've taken some liberties, which you know you can't take. We might show somebody's house being taken by a park. For example, we know we can't just do that, but these are representative of gestures that we think are worth taking. So I'm going to turn it over to Phil, and he'll walk us through it, and I'll chime in on occasion. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, John. So how did we approach this? The first thing we did was just walk down the street, right, and assess the existing conditions. So, you know, a couple of things worth noting. The streetscape itself needs some improvements, whether it's the road or the sidewalk or the proximity of houses and buildings along the sidewalk. There's no delineation of different modes of transportation. You see buses, cars, very few people. It's not a very inviting pedestrian thoroughfare. While there's sidewalk throughout, it's inconsistent. It isn't very cohesive. There's green space, but it's pretty underutilized, right? There's some trees along the corridor, but it's not very intentional. There are some open, lawns, as you see at the intersection by Warren, but they're not really being used. You could see the same at Luciano Field. And then commercial spaces, they're pretty sporadically located throughout the corridor. And as John had mentioned, one of the big goals here was trying to create a cohesive Broadway corridor, something where commerce, pedestrians, people who live there can feel like they're part of a neighborhood as a whole. There's one identity that's tying the whole thing together. So we'll talk about that a bit more as we move through. So identifying those key issues, as I said, lacks a cohesive identity, right? So we want to tie it together both as a corridor itself, to the town of Arlington, and then to the region as a whole. As a main local artery, it doesn't provide multimodal transportation. Density, as we discussed, whether it be residential or commercial, is pretty sporadic and haphazard. It lacks kind of an organization. The diversity of uses is similarly sporadic and inconsistent. And there are no central hubs along the corridor that really connect between Arlington Center and Somerville and Alewife Brook Parkway. So, taking those issues and creating opportunities, we've got a pretty ambitious first one, which is to do away with fossil fuels throughout our identified study area. So, we're going to aim to create a state-of-the-art geothermal network throughout for heating and cooling. So that's businesses and residences. Second, we want to prioritize circulation for everyone. That's accessible circulation for everyone. We want to concentrate higher density and mixed uses. We want to add more green space throughout. And we want to create neighborhood centers, those hubs that we spoke about. So the study area, as we defined it, actually stretches from Mass Ave up to the Mystic River and then down along Alewife Brook Park. And you can see Broadway and Warren kind of as the spine along that. So our envisioning of that looks like this. So what we've done is identify 6 key focus areas, starting with that geothermal network that I spoke about, and moving along the street, starting with the Arlington Gateway Hub. We're going to talk about streetscape improvements, Luciano Field connection, our envisioning for a Warren Square, and then finishing off at Arlington Center and improving access in and around that area. So starting first with the Broadway corridor geothermal network. So this is perhaps the most prominent improvement throughout, and it kind of unites and ties together this whole proposal. So I'm going to let John talk a little bit about what this is going to look like.
Okay. This is something that's been on our mind, and I know it's on everybody's mind, and we thought, okay, we're allowed to dream. Well, we're going to dream. And we're aware that technology is coming where geothermal energy can be a potentially economically viable force, but the general consensus is it needs to be done on a large scale for it to work. You know, we all know homeowners have tried to do it, and some do it. I'm considering it myself. It's an expensive proposition, but it's something that gets us off of fossil fuels, and it's something that's going to happen. So we thought with this identification of an area that we would just take this opportunity, and quite nicely, the shape of our opportunity is really in the shape of a leaf, which is kind of symbolic of what we're talking about. We know that the technology is coming that involves drilling wells on the order of like 2 miles deep. I mean, this is above my pay grade, but this is going on. And that there's talk about networking between public-private networking between municipalities and utility companies. And what we're proposing is to take this opportunity, as Cambridge did, by the way, not with geothermal, but they dug up every street in Cambridge, and I confess I'm a Cambridge resident, although I'm an Arlington architect, to replace all their 100-year-old sewer and drain lines. Well, the same thing can happen with utility lines, and we're suggesting that happen here. So we're suggesting that there be right down Broadway is going to be a main geothermal line, and then the branch streets would each get their own line, and the houses would be connected. And for those who are watching or don't know, I mean, it basically would enable homeowners to take the existing heating and cooling systems in their house and power it with geothermal energy rather than with the fossil fuel energy. That's the first point that I want to make. This slide just simply shows it's the underground, you know, it's a piping system that can be done. So that's our first proposal, and I appreciated that opportunity to step aside from what we normally do day in, day out and say, okay, you want to dream? This is what we should do.
So identifying next then kind of the first actual hub along the Broadway corridor is what we titled the Arlington Gateway Hub. So this is a very high density mixed use area that's, you know, right at the mouth of Broadway, as it were, the entrance to Arlington from the street. And Delapo is going to expound upon that a little bit.
So when we were looking at the Arlington Gateway Hub, we thought this is our gateway of Arlington, so we have to exemplify it. We have to showcase it. And we also were looking at some of the needs that Arlington has asked for, such as affordable housing. And we looked at, you know, the Alewife Greenway, and how can we also connect that into the Arlington Gateway Hub. And so one of the ways was to create this mixed-use commercial retail space that will provide affordable housing, as I mentioned. We'll also provide retail spaces and commercial spaces for the residents to use to walk up through. And also the addition of green plazas so people can walk through, and it just really is to attract pedestrians and make this a more people-friendly kind of walk-in entrance for Arlington. So here you can see, we're just showcasing how the approach, how it would look as you were coming down the Alewife. And so it's really about kind of bringing up that green space, you know, stepping it up, bringing some residents in there, making it more friendly, bringing people into the space to enliven it. And so we want to do that at the Gateway and bring people walking in from Somerville all the way up and people from Arlington walking into the space. And so this is our second method of which we wish to address, you know, the Broadway street and how to improve it.
So looking then at general streetscape improvements, right, this is something that we're going to carry all the way up and down the corridor. We took a closer look, a more granular look at what that actually looks like, with particular attention to how do we actually accommodate multimodal transportation. So John, if you just want to talk through this section.
Okay. Our office is a block from Broadway. So I've honestly, I'm aware it's there. I've never really gone over and taken a close look. I went over and actually pasted off. First question was, well, how wide, this is the non-dreaming part of me, well, how wide is Broadway? What can you actually do? So I pasted off. We got the actual width. I didn't do it by Google. And what we are proposing is similar to what's being talked about. And I think, you know, clearly we want to get a two-lane bikeway that says its own defined lane. And so we're certainly proposing that. This is where reality kicks in a little bit. We don't think it's wide enough corridor to have parking on both sides of Broadway and have a bike lane without taking people's houses. And we didn't want to go that far and say, you know, so we're not. We do think we should get away from the car. We don't think you need parking on both sides. We do think that that there's middle ground, if it wants to talk about it, perhaps some parking lots on occasion. You know, every 400 feet, you can handle the amount of cars that would have been on the street otherwise. That's basically this, you know, it's a taking use of the width that we have available, parking on one side, bike lane on the other, pedestrian-friendly walkways on both sides.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to move along because our time may be. Go ahead.
So moving up the street, we get to Luciano Field. And as we all know, right now, there is no connection between Broadway and Luciano Field. And it's kind of one of the few existing open green spaces in the community as it stands. And what we saw here was another opportunity for one of those hubs, as we mentioned, or at least the entryway into what can be a hub up by Warren Street. And we'll get to that shortly. But right now, what we really wanted to do was bring people to and from the field. And we're going to do that through a plaza that's in the middle of a mixed-use mid-rise development. I'm going to quickly breeze through the rest. Moving up the street, we've got the Warren Square redesign. We pulled traffic up away from the intersection of Bates and River to a different area, and we're focusing around a new hub here called Warren Square. And then we've got the Arlington Center redesign, which really looks at doing the same thing, improving traffic conditions in and around, and taking this bike lane that we spoke about up and down the corridor and connecting the Minuteman Bikeway to the Alewife Brook bike path.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Questions?
Ask about public art.
I'm going to ask you about public art. So, yeah, how valuable do you think having a vibrant public art programming is to, you know, rethinking public space like that you've been doing?
Well,
Yeah.
Which is clearly important. One of the things many things we didn't get to present here, but we are proposing that there be a geothermal sculpture in the middle of this park that we're creating at the intersection of Bate River and by redirecting the Warren Street intersection, we've gotten rid of that terrible Y. We've redirected it. We created a park on both sides with a sculpture in the middle of it. We think public art is very important.
Moving through the slides if you like.
Yeah, sure.
You can't present. Any other questions?
I was hoping actually that you could maybe talk a little bit more about this this new node that you're creating there for Warren Square.
Yeah.
Specifically about the way that you're diverting the street and looking at, obviously you had mentioned before, one of the things you noted where there were many underutilized green spaces in the median space.
Mm-hmm.
So how you're proposing taking a look at that.
Is that a question also we can
Yes,
answer?
if you could, and talk. I'm asking you to just explain that a little bit more.
We've gotten rid of we've redirected Warren Street so it cuts across and has an intersection right here. We've created a park instead of where Warren Street came through, and a park on the other side of Warren Street. So there's a park on both sides of the street that we've created with public art.
And I'd add that they're on the side
We
of the
took some
street.
property to do that, so no offense to whoever's property, but it can happen.
They're on the side of the street that's accessible by a sidewalk. So whereas the existing condition is a lawn that's in the middle of roadway that really no one's going to use, these are parks that people can get to from their homes and from the sidewalk.
You're on number 5 now. How many more slides do you have?
Well, there was we didn't talk about
This is
Arlington
really
Center.
kind of the
That's
end
the
of it.
last one. Okay. Caroline, do you have a question?
I'm fascinated by this geothermal solution. I think it's really bold and exciting. Curious if you thought about any other kind of energy, solar or...
Well, these parks that we put in, both at the intersection and up at Arlington, we're also proposing a park at Arlington that we didn't get a chance to talk about here. Heavily treed. Now, planting trees is another solution. That's maybe minor in the sense where this is not going to be a big forest, but perhaps it's a gesture.
Where in Arlington?
Pardon me?
Where would that park be in Arlington? On there?
In Arlington Center.
In Arlington Center.
We've redirected Broadway so that
Okay.
it comes in
We
like
went
this.
tree crazy.
We're proposing that the fire station become a civic museum or some kind of facility and not a fire station. So we've brought Broadway so it enters here, it does not come through. We've taken what is now a parking area. We've parked it and treated it. And we know that maybe some makeup parking was lost. We get that because of that. But we just find that intersection, which is such a major part of Arlington, just isn't happening. And so we took some liberties.
Okay, thank you very much. I'd appreciate it if there's an opportunity for the judges to ask general questions of the group. And maybe you can, and we'll take maybe 5 minutes of your judging deliberation time to do that. I'm just making that call. So we're watching the time, and do you have any questions of any of the participants that you'd like to ask now that you've heard it all?
One question I have, I was really, I love the way that the team from Winslow started their presentation with talking about how this is really the opportunity to step back and dream, which you all have done. And I think I'd just ask, as you were doing that dreaming, what was the biggest aha moment, or what was the thing that really, when you dream, you become passionate and excited and can't wait to put pen to paper and make something come to fruition. So what was the biggest dream that you really excited you about this whole project? I'd like each person.
Go down the line.
Yeah. So if you'd like to start, that would be fantastic.
Sure. Well, I hope Petra had to leave, but I hope I'm speaking on the behalf of both of us when I say that we learned so much about how when you really focus on a people-first street, how little people don't want to necessarily take their cars. They only do because they think that's what's convenient. But when we redesign it to be people first, to be transportation first, with our arterial bus transit lane, we see that people will be more motivated to take more sustainable methods of transportation. So I would say that that's definitely the biggest thing we learned, that just by doing some redesigning and shifting our focus from this car-centered view of transportation, we can really set Arlington on a path to the future. It's just throwing me off.
Can I ask Daniel and Jamie to come up, maybe stand up because you guys are in the dark, and answer that question quickly because we're losing time.
Yeah, for us, I feel personally, for me, the most inspiring thing is the green spaces that Arlington have. We just like inventorize the opportunity space, and Arlington has Minuteman Park Trail, Alewife Brook, and then the Mystic River. And what we did is simply connecting the dots, because basically Arlington is almost complete. And by just connecting the dots, like making sure that civic spaces are connected to open spaces with variety of a slow street connection and sustainable mobility, I feel that that's like very, very inspiring to us. If you want to add to that.
No, that was perfect.
Okay, thank you both very much. You have a representative. Come on up. Philippi.
So for us, I guess the haha moment was when we were designing. I actually could see myself walking down Broadway because I currently live in Arlington and I just moved recently. So I've been able to see like how Mass Ave is very enlivened, you know, the day and the night. So seeing our design, the way we're designing it, the green spaces, the retail spaces, I could see myself as a person who would want to live there and want to move to Broadway. And that got me really excited. I got our friend really excited. And like my boss said, it's a great place, a great way to design. First time to be able to just do that freely. And that is really amazing to be able to have that opportunity. So thank you very much.
Thank you. I don't know if it's your decision now. Do you want to give up a couple of more minutes and ask another question, or?
I have no idea who. I'm on a three-way tie right now. So I guess I have a question, kind of, if we could just go down the line again. Everybody kind of touched on the connectivity and the cohesion, which I think is right on the money because that area is so delineated right now. It's almost like it may as well have a wall around it. And I'm curious about how is that connectivity, do you see it more as like tentacles or is it more nebulous, like growing from a center point?
Yeah, I think cohesion was at the center of what we wanted to do to kind of have an identity along the corridor. So
that's right.
To your question, I don't necessarily see it as like a node that then spreads out. I think we're looking at the corridor as a place. The whole thing becomes a place, and you tie it together with certain elements, one being the geothermal network that we're talking about, right, quite literally, but another being design elements, so the streetscape being consistent as you move along it, the hubs kind of going from higher density to lower, up to higher, down to lower, but being really intentional with it, and the placemaking that you're doing along the whole stretch.
One of the unique thing about Arlington, unlike many suburban towns, is that it's not designed as a cul-de-sac. So the network is already gridded, even though it's like low density. So what I learned is that having a gridded street network is already a blessing. So you can easily turn each streets into safer and pedestrian and bike friendly. So what is important in making connectivity happen is options. If people can have an options to, okay, maybe this day I want to still take a car because I need to run around here and there, but then the other day I want to enjoy the sun, I want to walk, I want to bike, and just because of that, the street network that is gridded provides us with a lot of alternatives, right? And what we want to do is just to enhance and pick and choose which streets can be slower, which corridors that students might take that we need to improve the safetiness of crossings and etc. So.
Talia.
Yeah, so normally Petra would take this question because he's so passionate about transportation. I really don't, well, he would usually take this, but I'll try to answer it as best as I can. I know that as we designed, and Petra looked at transportation, how we can connect Arlington to other neighboring towns and cities, we thought a lot about that. We thought, how can we promote connectivity? And I know that one of the things Petra was considering doing was having the buses go to different places. For instance, see, I'm not quite sure if this is exactly the town he was talking about, but bus route 87 to Sullivan is what I believe he planned for. So essentially, our design does incorporate these elements that focuses Arlington, focuses the connectivity to Broadway. And we see, I mean, to try and answer your question as best as I can, I guess we see Arlington more as a center point, and where we focus on how we can connect Arlington to all of the neighboring towns and cities effectively.
Oh, that was exciting.
Oh, everything was so excellent. I think each team just did a wonderful job, each in their own different ways.
It's so very different, which I really appreciate, is well, there were some overlaps in terms of sustainable transportation strategies. Each one had such a different focus with regard to how to connect people and the way that they were going to really create communities, which was really exciting.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting that the Arlington high school students who live here and have grown up here, presumably, had such an interesting perspective, really knowing the town. And then the other two, who don't necessarily live in town, were able to, I think, look at it with in another kind of way, from a really
More analytical perspective.
exactly,
Yeah.
without being so
One of the things that I really loved about the Arlington high school students, first of all, what an incredible presentation.
Unbelievable.
Beautiful.
From,
Just fabulous.
as a freshman student in high school,
Jeez.
I could not be more proud of
Right.
the students here in Arlington to see them the way that
Absolutely.
they represented them. And the research that they did
I
was
thought,
wonderful.
I wrote down participation for them. They were by far the best with their surveys and really that engagement. The other teams had plans for that, but the Arlington High School team was really the one that just ran right at it. I thought that was
really did.
a great approach.
And I think when we were preparing for this here, one of the things that we really started to think about were the categories of people, planet, and participation.
That's right.
And I think that the Arlington students really hit it out of the park when it came to thinking about the people who live here and what their needs are and the planet. I mean, their multi-layered approach to sustainability, both in transportation as well as things like stormwater management.
Yeah, their resiliency plan was just music to my ears. I thought that was incredible.
Yeah. One of the things that I was hoping for a little bit more look in was that idea of participation. How are people going to interact in these spaces together? Which I think they started to scratch the surface of. And I think it would be wonderful if they continue this exercise, as a project in school, to think a little bit more about that opportunity to dream even a little bit bigger
Right.
in terms of moves that we can make in the environment to have people participate in their community together.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I thought that, interestingly, everybody's presentation was still pretty rooted in reality. I mean, and that's actually really good. But I was expecting some kind of more off the wall kinds of ideas, but it was excellent. One thing that the students did think about so much was the public spaces. And the separated bike lanes, you can really see them, noticing how they and their fellow students.
Well, they don't have
really
driver's
use-
licenses
they don't have
yet.
Exactly. So that was super important.
Yeah. And I loved the MIT team with that elevated bike lane. I thought that
Yes.
was very ingenious, and I
That
like
was,
that.
yeah.
And whether it's just for bikes or people with strollers or people in wheelchairs, I liked that inclusivity was really a part of their presentation.
Right. I think with the MIT presentation, I really loved the way that they looked at how to activate our underutilized land in this corridor.
Yeah.
Starting with Arlington Center and Russell Commons and using that as an opportunity to bring housing into Arlington Center and address our, really important need for greater affordable housing in town.
Absolutely.
And how that might play into, again, that wonderful swooping bike path over Mass Ave.
Yeah, that would just be such a focal point of the town.
It makes me think of the High Line in New York,
Oh, exactly.
just up
And
above
what a great
the-
place for public art.
Yeah. Exactly.
Speaking of which,
Their whole idea of that, what they call it, the complete neighborhood. I got it. It was
Yes.
it was really evident in how they presented.
Absolutely. I also, I think they were really onto something with creating a civic building in that corridor as well.
Yes.
Because I think that again, that's such a pull
That's
for,
right.
for people as well. I know that Fox Library is very, very well loved, but it's also limited in terms of
that's
its
right.
ability to provide community spaces for gathering beyond, smaller family units.
Exactly.
And so the ability to have beyond town hall and some of our other larger gathering spaces in town, an opportunity to bring people together beyond parks, which are wonderful in some of our warmer
July,
months.
yeah.
Exactly.
Exactly.
But to have a gathering
Yes.
space that really is focused year-round on, again, that participation piece and bringing people together, I think was a wonderful strategy.
Yeah.
And also, they really talked about the Yale Life Brook, and it is such a wonderful resource. It's so been neglected, and I loved how they really kind of brought it to the foreground and really talked about how, it should be part and parcel of everything they talk about.
So let's talk about Winslow Architects a little
absolutely.
bit. So that geothermal idea just,
Oh my gosh.
I gasped. It was so
Unbelievable.
exciting.
That was really...
I think that their idea was maybe the boldest because, it was kind of grounded in reality, but that kind of approach would be just a game changer for the town of Arlington.
Absolutely.
I loved that. And the fact that they live and work there, I thought was kind of exciting. So where they didn't have the broad survey, they are the survey. It's actually their neighborhood. So I thought that was kind of clever. And pointing out that the shape of it was a leaf.
Yeah.
So obvious. Why didn't I? I wish it had been my idea.
No, I think they brought a really unique perspective, both living and working in
Yeah,
Arlington,
absolutely.
and the fact that they experienced this differently from some of the other teams, I think, really played into the way that they were looking at density and where an increased density was important, and bringing in commerce in a much larger way, especially at the Arlington Gateway. Area as well, to really look at the appropriate places to rethink height in Arlington, and where are the appropriate places for us to, perhaps look at higher density, greater mixed use, and I loved too that they called out the underused median parks along Broadway, which it's wonderful to see the green space. They always make me wish for something more every time I walk through and I see this really inaccessible green space that is so desired in town. So I wish we'd had a little more time to dig in.
Yeah.
They had so many ideas that it was actually harder to dig into the details on some of them. Specifically with Warren Square.
Well, that bold idea about actually moving or getting rid of the fire station there and turning that into green space. Wow, again, very bold.
Very bold. And I liked, they had the advantage with their experience in affordable housing.
Yes.
We can all agree. But I loved that they were thinking about eco-solutions for affordable housing, because there's still that assumption that eco ideas, whether it's your electric vehicle or solar panels, that's for elite.
That there's a privilege.
Elite landowners, and to get that accessibility into affordable housing, I thought would something that Arlington could be really excited about.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think, one of the questions we asked them was, and that they brought up was this idea about taking a step back to dream. I loved all of their answers and how passionately they spoke about especially about envisioning yourself in the future and what would make you, especially as the young woman on the team who was a newer resident of Arlington, what would make you excited to be a longer term resident of Arlington and stay in Arlington and grow and experience this community in 20 years, and to have these ideas really spur that type of passion is really exciting to see.
I agree.
In terms of did you have any thoughts on, again, this idea of people, planet, and participation as areas that we're looking through? Any places where we'd love to see further study?
I think I like what you said a minute ago about work and live.
Yes.
And I think it didn't occur to me till you said it, but I think a little bit more like what's residential versus what's commercial versus what's recreational. I would like to, if there was a phase 2 of this study, I think that's what I would like to explore a little bit more.
I agree.
And one thing that we've noticed, over the course of 12 years of public art turning into the Commission for Arts and Culture, that there are these 3 separate nodes in Arlington, and overall, right? The Heights, the Center, and East.
Yeah.
And how can we bring them together? How can we make that, or what to do about those things? keep them separate and grow each one, or have them
or link them together
somehow. And public art along that corridor was one of the ways we had thought about trying to link them together.
Well, I'm dying to hear what you thought about the public art approach from these teams.
Well, I think public art has really reached a point where it's like, oh, well, of course we would have public art. I didn't even have thought that we wouldn't
didn't even
include
bother
it.
with a slide. Yeah.
My experience working with public art is, where is the money going to come from? It's always the problem, and some of these larger things that we talk about are 6-figure, 7-figure kinds of,
Investments.
Investments.
Right.
And so, we really want to make sure that we have the funds in the future to understand how important that is to build community. And it's as important as the built environment. It really is. And we see it, we hear it all the time.
I am delighted to be able to have the teams come back again. We're at that big moment when we're going to find out in just a minute who won this competition, who was second and who was third place. I think they were all winners. Before they come in, though, I'd like to just remind people at home that this is not an exercise that was commissioned by the town of Arlington to figure out what buildings were going to be built and what was not going to happen in town. This is an exercise of some very creative people for what they would imagine might happen in Arlington. This is a purely visionary exercise. It is not a reality, at least not yet. Maybe by 2040, we'll see some of these things. Thank you. Now, can I see the attendees come in? Thank you very much. So Petru Sofio from Arlington had to leave. We've got Talia Askenazi, and we've got Daniel Pratama. We've got Jay Maddox, and Sharon Hassenfratz was not able to join us. Dalepo Peckley is with us, John Wildenslow, and Phil Reville. And now I'd like to introduce one of the people who made this possible today, and the chair of the Arlington Board of Selectmen, also a co-chair and leader in the civic engagement group that helped raise the money and made this possible today, Len Diggins.
Thank you, Ms. Norton. It's just like a politician, how to come in at the end of it and seemingly take credit for it all, but really credit really goes to Ms. Norton, who passed or brought the resolution before town meeting and got vote from the select board and town meeting to make this happen. And her perseverance was really key to this because it's hard for a town to really pull off something like this on its own, and so Barbara really took the reins and led the charge on this, and we really were I was happy to support her, because what's important about supporting something like this is to make residents of town realize that you have the ability to help bring your vision to reality, not so much the vision for the contestants, but the vision of something that you want to do. And Arlington is a great town because it will support you in that, and that's part of what the Civic Engagement Group is about, and that's a lot of what people in town who help lead this town are here to do. And so I really want to applaud Ms. Norton for pushing through and bringing this plan, her vision, to reality. So we now will get to announce the winners. And this is really exciting for me because I've never done this. I've always been on the watching it. And so in third place, we have Winslow, and so there you go. And thank you. It's a very modest amount, and really appreciate everyone's participation in this. And second place, we have the Arlington High School students. And in first place, well, it's no suspense at this point, MIT students. So thank you very much. So on that note, once again, I want to thank ACMI, essentially where I kind of started, I've been in Arlington for a while, but my participation in the town really started with ACMI, and so thank you very much. In very short notice, the crew really helped pull this all together, at least this final stage of this design competition. So thank you to the judges, thank you to the contestants, and once again, thank you to Ms. Thornton, and thank you for watching. And if you're a resident, please participate. Do whatever you want in this town. Thank you.